VII. The anatomy of Illuminism. Illuminism may be defined as the universal science of light, not only in the spiritual meaning of the words but in their every meaning, for even in its physical nature light is a complete mystery. God is light, out of light is the world created, and out of this formal change appears life, the activity of light whilst death is its shadow or darkness. Between these two stands love, which is light in its human and creative form. In the Zohar we read there is a heavenly David, as well as an earthly one. When God wants to show clemency to the world, he looks at this David, and his visage becomes illuminated. One here David represents what we have called the fourth dimension, for whatever is on earth has its counterpart on high, there being no object, however small, in this world but what is subordinate to its counterpart above which has charge of it, and so whenever the thing below bestirs itself, there is a simultaneous stimulation of its counterpart above, as the two realms form an interconnected whole that is one continuum. 2. This world of light is full of symbols, which if we could read them aright would lead us to reality, which is union with God. There is nothing either created or thought, says Juan de la Cruz, that can offer to the understanding a means suitable for this union, because the understanding is the obstacle which this union has to surmount. Or as the Zohar says, with his ordinary understanding, man cannot understand the revelation of mysteries. All that I am about to reveal to you can be revealed only to the masters, who know how to keep the balance because they have been initiated. 3. The physical aspect of Illuminism is a definite brilliance of the skin and eyes. We read, Moses wist not the skin of his face shone, for this is not a mere figure of speech. The moral aspect is an irresistible attraction, and the intellectual an overwhelming sense of authority which defies contradiction. Though to the Jews the Messiah represented the light of the world and his coming meant the conquest of the world, a quite different interpretation was frequently adopted. It was founded upon Jacob's wrestling with Tetragrammaton and it reads as follows, And he said, Let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go except thou bless me. R. Judah discoursed on this verse, Who is she that looketh forth as the dawn, fair as the moon, clear as the sun, terrible as an army with banners? SS 6:10. This verse, he said, refers to Israel, at the time when the Holy One, blessed be he, will raise them up and bring them out of captivity. At that time he will first open for them a tiny aperture of light, then another somewhat larger, and so on until he will throw open for them the supernal gates which face on the four quarters of the world. And, indeed, this process is followed by God in all that he does for Israel and the righteous among them. For we know that when a man has been long shut up in darkness it is necessary, on bringing him into the light, first to make for him an opening as small as the eye of a needle. The path of dulleth on the tree of life and then one a little larger, and so on gradually until he can endure the full light. It is the same with Israel, as we read, By little and little I will drive them out from before thee, until thou be increased, etc. EXXXIII, 30. So, too, a sick man who is recovering cannot be given a full diet all at once, but only gradually. But with Esau it was not so. His light came at a bound, but it will gradually be withdrawn from him until Israel will come into their own and destroy him completely from this world and from the world to come. Because he plunged not the light all at once, therefore he will be utterly and completely exterminated. Israel's light, on the other hand, will come little by little, until they will become strong. God will illumine them forever. 5. In short, the chosen people are the light of the world, a light which at present is mixed with darkness, the Gentiles or children of Esau. This darkness will vanish little by little. First Israel will look forth as the dawn, next she will become fair as the moon, then as clear as the sun, and lastly, terrible as an army with banners. Such is the reformulation of YHVH. When this is accomplished, not a Gentile will be left to pollute the earth, for Israel will have become its messianic shin which will untie the tongue of God, and on the utterance of his name will the entire universe vanish into absolute light. Such is the inner meaning of Illuminism to the Kabbalist. Illuminism Revolution means turning around. Every 24 hours the earth completes a revolution from night to day and back again into night. Man is not so mathematically poised, he cannot calculate the revolutions of his soul. When they occur they come as overwhelming shocks to his whole moral system, and unless he is mentally balanced they are apt to lay him under so tyrannical an obsession that his whole life is thrown out of the perpendicular. In its psychic form, this problem of revolution is little understood, in spite of the fact that it constitutes the foundation of social evolution and dissolution. When a revolution takes place humanity does not slough its skin, in place its skin is ripped off from it, leaving an agonized body behind. In the past the whole process of deliverance from what is called evil has been so ghastly that it demands our closest attention. Here we will attempt to open its secret chambers. Light in itself is an invisible vibration which is endowed with visibility by the eye, which in its turn was created by light, that is by countless millions of vibrations playing upon the surface of the living skin until from their irritation was created this most mysterious of all the animal organs of sense. What, then, is mind? Mind, we hazard to answer, is the transmutation of light into thought, that is of spirit into reason. Light is consequently the conductor between divinity and humanity, between God and man. There is the divine thought, there is light, lastly there is human thought, such as the first great psychic, or mystical, revolution. As man is fashioned from out of inertia, the dust of the earth, and through the breath of life, that is the essence of the divine dynamic, becomes a living soul, his mind, that is the organ of his thoughts, is constantly attracted towards inertia. It is only when the God within him, the living soul, is aroused, that he can break away from things earthly and soar closer to the divine thought which created him. This breaking away from the inert towards the living is called an act of will, let there be light, but in its restricted human form. Obviously, then, it is a personal endeavor, that is to say, it can only be accomplished by the individual, for though one individual can obtain guidance from another, the toil and the labor is his and his only. Now the key to the unlocking of the mystery of revolutions, human upheavals, is to be discovered in this word guidance. If the guide points out the way, leaving it to the free will of the individual to travel along it, then he is a true light unto the guided. But if instead he blindfolds the individual and then forces him in a certain direction, in place of a guide he becomes a tyrant, for in actual fact he will plunge the guided into darkness, a darkness which, though it may take upon itself the appearance of light, is nothing more than a delusion, a dream, and a nightmare. For the individual to will that light shall be is something quite different from being hypnotized into believing that light is and already exists. Belief is of the dust of the earth, it is the static shadow of divine power, will is of the breath of life, it is the dynamic force of that same essence. Thus it happens that true faith is belief crucified on the cross of will, a transmutation of the material into the spiritual. For an individual to accomplish an act of will is to attain to the supreme Eucharist, but for an individual to obliterate the wills of others by forcing his will, however spiritualized it may be, onto others is to take part in a black mass. That is to obliterate light, and the higher the spirituality the deeper the darkness resulting. We will attempt to explain this in simpler terms. If a bright light is brought into a lit room which is crowded with people, it is probable that those nearest to it will blink, but that those at a distance will be but little affected by it. Should, however, the room be in complete darkness, and should those assembled have been in it for a long time, then, irrespective of the conditions of their eyesight, the probabilities are that all will be blinded and bewildered. Now, if instead of a light and exalted symbol of divinity, a higher idea of God, be explained to a roomful of intelligent and educated people, the influence of this idea is not likely to be great, because they all possess intelligent ideas regarding the divinity, and consequently these ideas counteract, or drown, the new idea. But if instead the room is filled with uneducated and ignorant people, that is people who having thought little have never developed the critical faculty, then according to the sympathies, antipathies, and emotions of the audience will it accept or reject the idea, not calmly but with frenzy. The idea will in fact detonate a moral explosion. To turn from the explosive to the exploder, history proves again and again that the greatest religious reformers have almost without exception appealed to the most ignorant and uncultured classes of society. In our opinion, these religious reformers never belonged to the higher grade of masters, because true wisdom reveals that it is madness to attempt to illumine the people in bulk, for, though the masses can easily reflect the divine light, they can only do so in an unintelligent way, that is in an anti-divine way, or diabolically. In their case, the intenser the light the profounder becomes the shadow. We also believe that innumerable attempts to illumine the masses are always being made by masters of the lower grades, these masters in the aggregate representing the satanic force of the world. Further, we know beyond any shadow of doubt that, unless the masses are crude, animal, uncultured, and ignorant, success in transmutation is either wanting or strictly limited. Individuals, like single grains of gunpowder, may be ignited and burn away, but a mass of individuals will not and cannot explode unless through a lack of intellectual freedom it has been tamped into a solid block of powder. In this sense a void is not an emptiness, but a fullness of undifferentiated quality. This is the meaning of the second verse of the first chapter of Genesis, and the earth was without form, and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. What did the Spirit of God move upon? The face of the waters, that is, an undifferentiated medium, a still and perfect mirror. This was the primal explosion which started the revolution of existence. Therefore to detonate revolution there must exist a negative organ and a positive idea, which means that the people must lack intellectual liberty and an illumined master must exist. The fourth dimensional state. From the illumined we will now turn to the illuminator, the man who illumines, and here we will attempt to explain this part of the problem diagrammatically. In diagram 5, page 75, AB represents time, space, and CD the divine spirit which as it impinges on AB creates existence, life, and consciousness. This consciousness grows by a balancing of opposites, the spiritual and the material forces, and once this is realized by man he emerges, or emanates, from his animal chrysalis. Secret wisdom of the Kabbalah, page 75, diagram 5, the fourth dimension. Secret wisdom of the Kabbalah, page 76, diagram 6 is a representation of the Kabbalistic tree of life in dimensional form. Secret, diagram 6, the fourth dimension shown Kabbalistically, diagram 6, the fourth dimension shown Kabbalistically. G and J represent the 1-, 2-, 3-, and 4-dimensional worlds. The first is cut off from the second by the veil BC, which represents a mathematical point in extension, that is a line, a positive and a negative pole. A dweller in A must penetrate this veil before he can understand what D is like. The second is cut off from the third by the veil F, which represents length and breadth in extension, that is a plane surface or a line moving outwards from itself. To understand G, an inhabitant of D must penetrate F. The third is cut off from the fourth by the veil high, which represents length, breadth, and thickness in extension, that is a cube, a plane moving outwards from itself. To attain to J consciousness, high must be transcended. The scientist, however, insists that there is no separation between G and J, which means that they form a continuum. This may be true enough mathematically, but it is not true in everyday life, for though we recognize time we cannot rationally explain it, it is a mystery, and as great a one as the movement of a point or the movement of a line would be respectively to the dwellers in A and D. To us of three-dimensional consciousness, height, or thickness is not a movement, it is a quality of space, something which can be fixed and in abstraction is fixed. Consequently, as time is movement or duration to us, were we to attain to a four-dimensional consciousness it would also become a dimension of space, that is a fixed quality of it, and all spaces lacking this dimension would automatically become mathematical quantities or unsubstantial shadow worlds, pure mental pictures with no real existence outside the mind. Though there may be, and are so mathematically, an infinite number of dimensions beyond the fourth, it is of no consequence to consider them, for ultimately, in order to exist, they must be included, as Bishop Berkeley so sublimely expressed it, in an eternal mind or spirit. Our immediate problem, therefore, is J, and not A. We will now turn to the upper portion of diagram 6. The line high we will suppose separates normal consciousness from abnormal or supernormal consciousness, respectively represented by G and J. The consciousness represented by G is drawn from the experience of the material world, three-dimensional space, and that of J is based on experience in the fourth-dimensional world. The first characteristic of J is that it includes G, and the second that its relationship with G is similar in essence to the relationship between G and D and A in diagram 6. As we have already pointed out, in J all knowledge of G is purely abstract, and so also is all knowledge of J and G, for just as a two-dimensional surface of G possesses no thickness and so possesses no tangible reality, so can no part of G possess reality in J. Yet we know that G is real, and consequently from this we infer that J also is real and that their unreality exists only in their relationship, that is in ourselves. This leads us to a fact of some importance, namely, that the reality of J is quite inexplicable in terms of G, except by the means of symbols. Thus, mathematically, it can be inferred that in a four-dimensional world a hollow ball can be turned inside out without breaking its covering, yet it is quite impossible to explain how this is done even if it were actually done before our eyes, because we cannot grasp the fourth-dimensional direction. We will now suppose that X is an ordinary man whose consciousness is expressed in a series of three-dimensional qualities, such as a 3 plus B 3 plus C 3 plus D 3 etc., a representing knowledge, B sentiment, C forcefulness, D sensuality, etc. By some means, which does not here concern us, one day X enters state J, four-dimensional consciousness, whereupon these factors instantaneously become a 4 plus B 4 plus C 4 plus D 4 etc. Whilst in state J these factors assume an infinite and absolute character, yet it must not be overlooked that though X on entering J gains a full appreciation of J, his ability to interpret things is limited to his G powers. His mental machinery is still of a G nature, and though all his G factors may be reduced to abstract quantities, his J knowledge is tangible and real and not a mere question of symbols. Whilst in state J he see that a 4, etc., includes a 3, etc., but is infinitely greater, so much so that his G consciousness is entirely swallowed up. For just as a cube contains an infinite number of planes the size of any one of its own sides, so does a 4, etc., include an infinite number of a 3s, etc. Whilst in state J, a 3 etc. sinks into illusion, a 4, etc., becoming the sole reality, which cannot, however, be. Secret Wisdom of the Kabbalah, page 78, explained to G individuals in any language they can understand. The mystical Eucharist at an end, X sinks back into state G, and though in this state his sole instrument is his three-dimensional consciousness, the union he experienced was so overwhelming that state J still remains the supreme reality to him. Should he have attained equilibrium in state G before entering state J, he will realize that this is not the only reality, that, as above so beneath, state G is equally real, that they are in fact two realities, the one belonging to conscious existence and the other to what may be called superconscious existence, that there is a relationship between these two, just as there is a relationship between the human embryo in the womb and the fully developed man, and that to attempt to explain the superconscious state to the purely conscious individual, that is to an individual who has never experienced superconsciousness, is to turn wisdom upside down. Such a man, the ordinary individual, we will call Y. Then, if X attempts to explain his experiences to Y, as all language deals with three-dimensional concepts, he can only do so by means of symbols, symbols which in some vague way may explain the infinite in terms of the finite and the timeless in terms of the timed. 6. Should X set out to explain them, to do so he must fall back on his G knowledge and education, consequently his symbols will depend on the relationship between the brilliance he has experienced in J and the balance of knowledge he has established in G, his normal life. The more ignorant he is and the more unbalanced he is, the cruder and more unbalanced will his symbols be. He can only build the symbolic temple out of the bricks of his three-dimensional knowledge, and if his mind is of mud and not of clay, then his symbols will be of mud and will never become bricks. The more ignorant he is, that is the less illumined he is in the space world, the darker will be his symbols. Consequently should Y be equally ignorant and totally unacquainted with the J vision, and should X force his symbols upon Y, for in spite of his ignorance his experience has endowed him with all the fervour of authority, he will so obsess Y that in place of exalting him to the superconscious state he will destroy his conscious state and plunge him into a sub or infraconscious state. He will plunge him into the Qliphoth, hell, in which he sees Satan robed in the glory of God. Y will experience a vision of the devil, the essence of the unbalanced animal nefesh, and he will be turned upside down. Such is the diagnosis of a would-be white magician creating, unconsciously, a black magical world. It is important to enter still deeper into this spiritual devolution. We will suppose that X's predominant characteristic is sentimentality, B, and that it has never been balanced. Then the chances are that his symbols will assume a strong B complexion and that in their general form they will become B, a 3 equals a 4. Y, we will suppose, becomes magnetized by X's magic. Then he will accept the general symbol B, a 3 equals a 4, as reality, but not having experienced what X means by a 3 equals a 4. When he, magnetized as he is, imposes this symbol on Z, he will not only adulterate it with his own leading unbalanced characteristic, which we will suppose is forcefulness, represented by C, but will do so in a lower degree, that is with lower magnetic power than the degree in which he received it. The general symbol will then become BXC, a 3 equals a 4, over 2. Thus the spiritual devolution will continue, and as it rolls downwards it will accumulate more and more unbalanced forces, until it is lost in the nonsense of such a monstrous hydra-headed symbol as 100 AX 500 BX 1100 CX 300 DX 900 EX 700 F equals, a 3 equals a 4, over 3600. And as from the very beginning a 3, a 4 is an absurdity, eventually all spiritual force will disappear, smothered by an accumulation of human desires which draw their strength from the unbalanced primitive instincts and emotions. The symbol will then become an idol. It will thus be seen that in the search after the unknowable, God, superconsciousness, call it what we will, the J state of diagram 6, the supreme difficulty is not to attain but to explain, and that all explanations, except between beings of equal spiritual and mundane knowledge, must lead to the propagation of a lie. The Kabbalists are right, the name of God is unpronounceable, and to attempt to pronounce it can only formulate the devil at the expense of the divinity. Diabolus est Deus inversus, this is the goal of all false symbols. Secret Wisdom of the Kabbalah, page 79. The Great Omission. Having now examined the source of mystic power, which in itself is neither good nor evil, because it is beyond good and evil, but which possessing stupendous energy can accentuate good and evil by potentizing them, we will inquire into the conception of religions and will attempt to ascertain whether, in spite of their astonishing differences, they do not possess some common denominator. To look for this common factor we must examine the lives of the masters of religion and not the doctrines of their followers, because these doctrines and the activities springing from them consist of a mass of lies and unbalanced movements. Also we must clear our minds of all the worldly sciences, ethics, aesthetics, philosophy, etc. We must jettison the symbolic language of the masters, and, having swept clean our minds of the dogmas, rituals, and canons of the churches, we must diligently search for that secret process whereby a helot can be transformed into a hierophant, not magically but spiritually. This indeed is the one and hidden problem of divine alchemy. We will first examine 3 masters known to all, Buddha, Christ, and Muhammad. What is there common in their lives? The first was born a prince, the second was the son of a carpenter, or the son of God if the orthodox object to so humble a parentage, the third was a camel driver. As different as their origins and worldly occupations were their intellects and characters, and again as different were the religions which they founded. Yet we find one thing in common in the lives of these 3 men, a state which we will call the Great Omission. There is a period in the lives of each of these masters concerning which nothing is known. For a time each one of them vanished from the world, from public life, and fructified his soul. For several years Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree, the tree of wisdom, meditating on the sorrows of mankind, and there he was transfused with so stupendous a magnetic power that even today his followers number 150 millions. Christ, brought up in poverty, from the age of 12 to 30 disappeared from the world, and during this long period no single mention is made of him. Then through baptism and prayer the heaven was opened, and the Holy Ghost descended in a bodily shape like a dove, symbol of he emerged an illumined adept. His followers conquered half the known world of their day, established a wonderful civilization, and still number 210 millions. Is this omission, this negative period, a coincidence in these 3 lives? The answer is no, and this answer is conclusively proved by examining the lives of the lesser masters. Moses disappeared into the land of Midian, met their 7 daughters of the priest of that country, lived with Jethro, ate their father, tended his flocks, led them to the backside of the desert and came to the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire, out of the midst of a bush. 9 Then he conversed with God, who revealed himself to be the secret Jehovah, and on his return to Egypt such was his power that not only did he to all intents and purposes found the Jewish religion, but he succeeded in turning Egyptian society upside down. St. Paul, journeying to Damascus, saw a vision of Jesus Christ, was filled with the Holy Ghost, and retired into the desert of Arabia, and on his return he began to undermine the power of Rome and more than any other man founded Christianity. Simon ben Yohai, the traditional composer of the Zohar, retired with his son to a cave and as legend affirms, sat in the sand up to their necks, for 12 or 13 years, studying the law. 10 Also Ramon Lull, the Kabbalist, in preparing himself for revelation and for the union with God sought the loneliest places and the most arduous ways. He withdrew far from the multitude, where there was nothing to distract him. At the foot of Secret Wisdom of the Kabbalah, page 80, Mount Rhonda, he constructed a little hut in which he received his pupils and taught them. But when he desired communion with God, he climbed to the summit of the mountain. 11 We will next turn to a modern example, that of Baha'u'llah, the follower of the Bab. In 1844 the Bab, a young man of 25 and the son of a wool merchant, first proclaimed his message in Shiraz. 7 years later he was put to death at Tabriz and his followers were persecuted for heresy. Baha'u'llah, a wealthy young Persian of Tehran, became a follower of his, and in the neighborhood of Baghdad spent 11 years, during 2 of which he hid himself so completely in solitude in the mountains that his own followers did not know his retreat. On his return his fame soon spread, and no attempt to stamp out Babism 12 succeeded. In Persia itself the persecution that raged intermittently up to the beginning of the present century has been all in vain. The religion grows and grows, silent and unobtrusive like a plant in the dark. 12 Nor are these mysterious retirements, concerning which the masters tell us so little, solely connected with religious manifestations, for they are to be found in the lives of many of the philosophers. Pythagoras exacted silence and abstinence amongst his disciples for 5 years, Lao Tzu retired from the world and was inspired of Taoism, Plato enjoined meditation on his pupils, and Bishop Berkeley was wont to retire into solitude at stated periods. Once, writing to a friend, he said, "I propose to set out for Dublin, but of this you must not give the least intimation to anyone. Speak not, therefore, one syllable of it to any mortal whatsoever. I would have the house with necessary furniture taken by the month, for I propose staying not beyond that time, and yet perhaps I may. I would above all things have a proper place in a retired situation, where I may have access to fields and sweet air." 13 Nor does the Great Omission halt here. Abramelin the Magi, a medieval Jewish magician, enjoins retirement. In his book The Sacred Magic we are informed, "I resolved to absent myself suddenly, and go away into the Hercynian forests, and there remain during the time necessary for this operation, and lead a solitary life." 14 The Met Mullah of Sudan fame sat in a cave under the Nile and repeated to himself the 270 names of Allah until Allah appeared to him. The Kabbalist Hayam Samuel Jacob Falk, born in 1708, did much the same. An admirer, Susmentius Nosy, writes, on one occasion he abode in seclusion in his house for 6 weeks without meat and drink. When at the conclusion of this period 10 persons were summoned to enter, they found him seated on a sort of throne, his head covered with a golden turban, a golden chain round his neck with a pendant silver star on which sacred names were inscribed. Verily this man stands alone in his generation by reason of his knowledge of holy mysteries. 15 So also did Weishaupt, the supposed founder of the Illuminati, spend 5 years in meditation, 1771–76, and then established his formidable sect. Even Napoleon said, "If I appear to be always ready to reply to everything, it is because, before undertaking anything, I have meditated for a long time, I have foreseen what might happen. It is not a spirit which suddenly reveals to me what I have to say or do in the circumstances unexpected by others, it is reflection, meditation." Also he said, "I command or I am silent," a profound magical saying. The Mystic Way. From the above very brief excursion into the Zohar says, "Truly, wisdom is not acquired by a man save when he sits and rests, as it says of Moses that he sat on the mountain 40 days. 16 The conclusion is, and this quotation supports it, that normally it is passivity and not activity of mind which unlocks the doors of the mysteries, retirement from the world being the keyhole of the door. Whilst in the passive state, when all mental activities are stilled and the brain itself becomes a spotless mirror, a vision is seen or a voice is heard, and in the twinkling of an eye the whole of man's being is changed and his outlook upon life altered. Modern medical science generally rejects the reality of these visions and classes them under various forms of madness. This explains nothing except that these visions are abnormal. What is madness? What are nerves? Cries Carlyle. Ever, as before, does madness remain a mysterious terrific, altogether infernal boiling up of the nether chaotic deep, through this fair painted vision of creation, which swims thereon, which we name the real. Was Luther's picture of the devil less a reality, whether it were formed within the bodily eye, or without it? In every the wisest soul lies a whole world of internal madness, an authentic demon empire, out of which, indeed, his world of wisdom has been creatively built together, and now rests there, as on its dark foundations does a habitable flowery earth rind. 17 Both are right, Carlyle, in that madness is a mystery, and the doctors in that mystery is often madness to the sane. The key of passivity has 3 flanges, namely equilibrium of body, of soul, and of mind. As the Kabbalist Isaac Meyer says, to arrive at a true knowledge of the simple substances, man must throw off the bond of matter, and by meditation transport himself into the intelligible world, and so seek to identify his essence with that of the higher substances. When in that condition, man does not recognize anything of the world of the senses. In that condition, man will find the evident bodies, in comparison with the intelligible substances, extremely insignificant, and see that the corporeal world is borne by the intelligible world, as if it were a ship on the sea, or a bird in the air. 18 In this state what we have called three-dimensional consciousness is rendered comatose, and with it a world which is both a reality and an illusion, a tangible thing and a mere reflection. Thus, freed from things earthly, the soul of man expands from what Kabbalistically is a negative existence towards a positive existence. Metaphorically speaking, first the soul becomes boundless, because the restrictions are removed, then, as the sides of the elemental pyramid dissolve into illusion, does it become the boundless light, and symbolized as the microcosmic shin it beholds the macrocosmic shin, whereupon God, the four-dimensional world, is seen face to face, and the hexagram, the symbol of the great work, is formulated. There are many ways of turning this magical key, and not infrequently it is broken in the turning, and with it the mind of man snaps into madness. In the West the key is often turned by piling symbol upon symbol until three-dimensional thought, so to say, is topped, and the spirit is freed. In the East this process is usually reversed, and symbol is taken from symbol until the last vanishes and the spirit is left as the one reality. In the West this science is called ceremonial magic, in the East, yoga. Both these methods of approach, though opposite, are effective. The one is like traveling round a circular road from left to right, and the other from right to left. Yet the first is extraordinarily dangerous. For example, take a flywheel. If the object is to stop its motion, either the energy of the engine should be decreased until the wheel ceases to revolve, or its energy increased until through centrifugal force the wheel explodes. Though this sudden shock will stop the wheel, in all probability it will wreck the engine. Plato, we believe, was right when he said that the root matter of this great knowledge is not to be found in books. We must seek it in ourselves by means of deep meditation, discovering the sacred fire in its proper source. This is why I have written nothing concerning these revelations and shall never even speak about them. Whosoever shall undertake to popularize them will find the attempt futile, for, except in the case of a very small number of men who have been endowed with understanding from God to discern these heavenly truths within themselves, it will render them contemptible to some, while filling others with vain and rash self-confidence, as if they were depositaries of marvels which they do not understand all the same. 19 On the tablet of Cebes may be read these words: There is only one real road to be desired, and this is wisdom. There is but one evil to fear, and it is madness. In these few words are summed up the rewards and the penalties of the mystic way. To attain to the light, the ineffable LVX, is the act of a magus. To expend this power is the act of a magician. If held erect, as held by Buddha, so that the uninitiated can see only its reflection, then magic is white. To hold it downwards so that the light burns among them, then magic is black. The first attitude is symbolized by the trident of Neptune, the ruler of the unstable waters, the second by the three-pronged fork of the medieval devil, by which souls are cast into hell. The united trident and fork are symbolized in the double shin, and also in the hexagram or seal of Solomon or of David. Like moths the uninitiated circle round these blinding lights and, becoming drunken on their brilliance, are scorched in their fire. As on the physical plane a man can become intoxicated on wine, and on the sensuous on love, and on the intellectual on knowledge, so also in the supersensuous world can he become drunken on the energy of the spirit. Woe to him who so drinks, for in place of seeing he will become blind. Reeling through the world he will use his trident like a pitchfork, turning humanity upside down. Such a man, as Illiff as Levi warns us, is a walking scourge and a living fatality. He may slay or violate, he is an unchained fool.
As always, there's more information provided in the links below. And thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment.